Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Kainamui Peaberry Wash Process Kenya from Switch Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Switch, based out of Tokyo, Japan. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel multiple times before, including most recently during our Japan review series, in which we visited their cafe and reviewed one of their El Salvadorian coffees. And in that video, I mentioned that we picked up a bag of their coffee, and that is this Kenya right here, as I asked the owner which of the coffees at the time was his favorite, and he said that this one was. So I figured we'd pick it up and check it out for ourselves. So we will see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 35. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe, which is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. I had a very strong preference towards the Chemex with this one, which does indicate a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. So it's on par with a lot of the previous experiences we've had with Switch's coffees, which is to say that they're not necessarily the lightest roasting coffee roaster in Tokyo. If anything, they remind me a fair bit of the 2018-2019 Sweet Bloom and Onyx coffees, which is to say that they're on the more medium light side of things in terms of that roast profile. So I feel like that might be the best idea and the best way to go with this one. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 11, first impression, and ran it through the V60 and definitely gave off a fair bit of Kenyan vibes, as right at the start it offered a notable savory aspect at the forefront, but it did also offer some nice sweeter attributes to balance out to the cup. Pretty straightforward with a bright Kenyan berry attribute complemented by a very nice candied aspect to it. So overall, didn't have too many complaints. We continue on to day 14. Opted for the Chemex, and there was once again notable brightness right at the forefront of this coffee, but it is followed nicely by an almost maple candy-like sweetness. Bright berries yet again with an almost cherry fruit chew-like aspect, so another really nice day of this coffee. We continue on to day 16, opted for the April Brewer, and this is the best the coffee has been to this point by a distance, as it's offering much more of the candied sweetness with a notable caramelized sense to it. Abundance of citrus and savory dark berries to complement a very strong sugary aspect to the cup, with a lingering red florality and savoriness as well. So a lot of what you'd expect for a Kenyan coffee, especially one that is roasted on the Probat. So a lot of these notes have been in line with expectations. However, they're coming out a little bit more sweet than I might have expected. So a lot of really positive things to take away. Day 19, higher temperatures and a more fine grind, and the coffee continues to remain notably sweet with a candied and caramelized attribute, while it is being complemented by a very bright berry aspect to it. Previously mentioned fruit chew remains ever present, as there is that cherry fruit chew sweetness to this cup. Continue on to day 22 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the cup is the best it had been up to this point, as it was offering a very candied attribute to it. Very much reminiscent once again of that cherry fruit chew, with notably less of the savory aspects, as the cup seems to have settled very well. Nice complementary red florality with a strong emphasis on the candied sweetness yet again. Day 24 will stick to the Chemex going forward, as it does have a little bit more of the candied floral aspect to it, but it's also been in line with the previous experiences of having these sweeter classic Kenyan attributes with a fair bit of the dark tart berry aspects to it, as well as a caramelized sweetness. Best it's been up to this point. Another really nice day of this coffee. Also worth noting that a little bit of the smokiness was toned down by adjusting our temperatures back to normal. Day 27, back through the Chemex yet again, as it continues to remain consistent with a sweeter cherry fruit chew characteristic. Additional notes include a sweeter citric brightness, a caramelized sweetness, a slight savory herbal tea-like aspect, a very slight red savoriness, so that of course being the infamous tea word, a slight bit of smokiness, herbal florality, as well as a sugary fresh fruit to the cup. Just quite a bit of depth actually, very interesting in that regard. And then day 30, final notes we have, and I ran out of space, so very few notes on this day. One more of the same try through the Chemex, and it's been consistent yet again with a slight bit more of a floral aspect to the cup, but in general, pretty Kenyan-like as you might expect. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the body level 4. Yes, so Kenyan coffees tend to have that juicy, very more full-bodied experience to them. This one right here took that to another level, and what I had to note about this is that this one was made with the Chemex, and the fact that it scored a level 4 in terms of the body just goes to show just how much texture there was in this one, as the Chemex typically tends to strip away a lot of the texture and body to the cup in general. So that scoring level 4 was very interesting, one of the more full-bodied cups of coffee that we have reviewed in quite a bit, honestly. Cleanliness, level 4. Yeah, that's always going to be a big deal to me when it comes to Kenyan coffees, because that goes to show that the flavor profile in it wasn't marred by any sort of tomato-like characteristics to it, which is kind of interesting. I'm skipping forward a little bit, but the savoriness does score a level 3, and I feel like that had to do a little bit more with the kind of hibiscus-like component that was present within it, as opposed to a very strong or robust tomato-like aspect, because that sort of savoriness, I probably would have scored it at a level 2, but there's enough savoriness in other regards for this cup to justify that level 3 mark. So yeah, cleanliness, it's justified at that level 4. It has enough of it to really kind of push it above the typical level 3 for a lot of the Kenyans that we do review. Finish, level 4, no surprise whatsoever. I've always said I would be extremely surprised if a washed Kenyan coffee doesn't score minimum level 4. Does have a fair bit of that long-lasting, bright aspects to this cup. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, but this is actually on the higher side of level 4. I do have to say this was a very sweet cup of coffee, and for Kenyan coffees, anytime you're really going to score in terms of that sweetness, then I'm really going to enjoy those Kenyan coffees. So this came in a couple of directions, most specifically that caramelized aspect, but also the candied aspect of this one with that sort of cherry fruit chew-like component to it. Level 4 seems like a pretty good place to fit it, though it was at the higher side of level 4. Acidity, level 4. Once again, we have a Kenyan coffee. There was a fair bit of brightness to it, even kind of toning down this coffee. There was always going to be that notable amount of brightness. So level 4 does feel fitting. Berry fruit, level 4. As I kind of mentioned, there's that cherry-like aspect to it, that cherry fruit chew. But in addition to that, a lot of those more classic tart berry components to it, most specifically those darker currants. So I can see all of those things being present within this one. Citrus fruit, level 4. I don't want to kind of one direction this coffee by saying that it was a very generic sort of citric component, because if anything, it actually had a nice little candied orange aspect to it. So a little bit more of a sweeter citric component to it, which is a nice selling point to me on this one. Gave it a little bit more fruit depth as well. Then we have quite a few level 3s. We'll start with the florality, level 3. So I mentioned that there's that hibiscus-like component to it, an ever-present, a pretty common thing, something I experienced from a lot of Kenyan coffees. It was well-defined within this one. Really liked that part of this coffee. Stone fruit, level 3. That's going to be a really nice selling point to me, as I was able to experience a slight bit of a peachy aspect to this one. And whenever I get that from a Kenyan coffee as well, that's another really nice selling point to me on a coffee. Caramel, level 3. As I mentioned, there's a caramelized sweetness to this one. In addition to that, that is where the candied aspect of this coffee goes. And since this coffee was sweeter to begin with, and this is scoring higher, then that's another nice selling point to me on this coffee. Savoriness, level 3, I already mentioned that, but just to reiterate one more time, that it did score at that level 3, not because of the tomato-like characteristics, but because of some other savory aspects that were present within this coffee. But as I am looking at this tasting wheel, I do think that it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. Alright, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I should probably address the elephant in the room that I didn't necessarily have the best experience when I visited the coffee shop out in Tokyo, but I did want to give this coffee as fair of a chance as possible, and this one definitely exceeded my expectations by a fair bit. I've mostly had mixed reviews on Switch's coffees, which is to say that the ones we have reviewed from them in the past, they've been fine, but this one has been by far my favorite of the coffees that we have discussed, because I feel like they did an exceptional job with this one. It offered tremendous sweetness to it, and when it comes to Kenyan coffees, that's the thing I search for the most, is sweetness, clarity, and lacking any of those tomato-like savory components. So since this one hit on all of those marks, of course it was a really nice Kenyan coffee for me. I do have to say it was on one of the better side of the Kenyan coffees I've had this entire year. I would say there have been some I've enjoyed a little bit more, but I think this one was a nice surprise in terms of just how much I enjoyed it relative to a lot of the expectations I had for it going into it. So massive credit to Switch on this one. I think that this is a very well done coffee. type of person I would suggest this coffee to. And I feel like it's a little bit more of the Kenyan drinkers like myself that have a stronger focus and emphasis on the sweeter aspect of those Kenyan coffees, because this one offered enough of the traditional Kenyan components to it. Of course, that brightness and tart berry aspect, while toning down some of the savory components. And I know that might be a slight bit of a sticking point because some people really like those savory characteristics that are within this coffee. But in its place, it offers some really nice additional components. Of course, that stone fruit, the florality, and even that nicer citric component to it that gives this one a little bit more depth than just a kind of generic, straightforward Kenyan coffee that we've all had so many throughout our lives. I've reviewed so many of those coffees this year. So this one's standing out in its own for being a little bit on the sweeter side of things, while offering a little bit more depth and complexity to it. Was really nice for me, and I think that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Kainamui Pea Berry Wash Processed Kenya from Switch Coffee. Thank you for watching.